And we are back this afternoon to continue this track on LLM, AI, and APIs. And so this morning we had to talk, from open source models to production. We had to talk about securing APIs into LLM. We had the talks about LLM plugins and how you can mix your APIs with them. And we had also a talk about how you can use the new LLM stack, LangChain or Llama Index and other tools to actually interact with your LLM with your own data. But now we have a really important topic, which is licensing. You've heard probably about a lot of compliance issues or ethics issues and many other things about how we can use the data, what's the model, and actually some thought leaders are trying to tackle that problem. And for that, we are glad to have Carlos Munoz Ferrandis with us.
Hi everyone.
Hello, Carlos. We're really glad to have you. You tackle a really important topic. You are responsible. You are responsible of tech and regulatory affairs at Hugging Face. And yes, we'd love to hear more about your what you have for us on responsible AI licenses.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, first of all, for the kind invitation. So hi everyone. I'm Carlos. I'm Counsel at Hugging Face. At the same time, I'm part of the group of experts on AI at the OECD, where we discuss the AI governance and regulation. And also, I've done my PhD research on open source and standards. So licensing is when my field, let's say like this. I think you may ask yourself if you are more on the technical side of things in AI. Was the purpose of talking about licensing today? I think it has become an increasingly relevant topic in AI, basically because from a technical perspective of the dichotomy between our traditional conception of software, right? We might refer to software as code or source code. When you go into ML, you start to realize that there are several different artifacts that are not just source code. So first of all, we have data sets, right? Training data sets, data. Then we also have machine learning models, weights. So these are like new artifacts that maybe can be governed or even licensed under different uses, right? Under different licensing terms. But I think to take a step backwards, the main first point we should ask ourselves is, what's the meaning of open, right, within AI? And I think this discussion goes even beyond the licensing, right? So the discussion of openness has many different perspectives. We might refer to something open from a technical perspective when referring to a software stack, when referring to different compatible or interoperable systems. We might refer to openness from the social dimension when we speak about some open communities, such as the open source, such as free software, such as Creative Commons, right? Or even we might take the legal dimension. What do we mean by open from a legal perspective in terms of a license, right? Which types of terms should we draft to claim our tool is distributed on an open basis? And when it comes to AI, this might apply, as I was saying before, not just to source code, right? In AI, it might be the training, the inference code, model architecture, but also to machine learning models, right? So to the weights, or even to the training data sets, right? So what do we mean when we refer to opening up or that I released a large language model on an open basis or with an open license, right? Because if we go back to the software community, we see that these particular terms, such as referring to open source, are very, very specific depending on the community, right? So if we refer to open source, I know we have the open source definition steered by the open source initiative. So for instance, a responsible AI license or a source available license wouldn't be deemed an open source license according to the open source principles and the open source initiative. And same can apply to Creative Commons licenses, right? So I think it's very interesting to start to think about how do we approach licensing within either large language models or even some other components such as datasets. And this has become a core question recently, in fact, I remember last year in 2022 when I was participating at the Big Science workshop. So Big Science workshop was an open and collaborative ML workshop. The main target of it was to explore and to develop and to train a large language model, Bloom, a multilingual one, on an open basis, right? And within this research project, we already had our discussions when it came to how were we going to license the large language model, right? Should we use maybe an Apache 2.0 license? As you may know, the Apache 2.0 license is like one of the main standards when it comes to open source and commercial or permissive open source licenses. Then you might also have the MIT license, BAD style of licenses, right? So these are the most used commercial open source licenses. And this is what we were thinking, actually. But then we realized, first of all, okay, but this license was tailored for source code. And at the same time, as a community, we have our concerns sharing this model in terms of who is going to use the model and for which purposes, right? So it was a pre-trained large language model, and we were not feeling comfortable that someone could use the model to provide medical advice or medical results interpretation. And at the same time, from a regulatory policy perspective, we were seeing that there is not such a thing as an AI regulation. And as you may know right now, within the EU, we are finishing the draft, or the EU institutions, so European Parliament, the Council, and the European Commission are finishing the draft of the EU AI Act, so a very specific or sectoral AI regulation, right? But in 2022, there wasn't such a thing. So this basically was, so this kind of context was the trigger to a new set of license. On the one hand, we had the responsible AI licenses, such as the Bloom license, or later on I will speak about the big code responsible open and responsible AI license. But also not just responsible AI license, you might find other different types of licenses, such as Meta's for research purposes license, when they release their large language models, such as OPT175, SEER in the context of ML Vision, BB3 also in the context of chatbots. And then also we go even to the university context, where Tsinghua University released GLM 130 billion parameters model, also with a very specific license for research purposes for the parameters of the model, and then another license for the source code of the model. So you're starting to see how basically the community is trying to address this, let's say, not maybe problem, but this new context in terms of licensing of new type of artifacts, right? Nowadays, even if we have this type of new concepts of licenses for machine learning, still, if you go to Hugging Face and if you go to the public hub, the most used license for model repos is the Apache 2.0 license, because of course the Apache 2.0 license is the core permissive standard within official open source licenses, right? But also a lot of data sets are licensed under Creative Commons licenses, and Creative Commons licenses were conceived to promote openness and distribution of internet-related content, right? Blog posts, papers, photos shared on the internet. Now, on 2023, we are seeing not just this kind of new types of licenses, so the very tangible thing, right? But also some kind of, from a maybe more social or policy perspective, new type of movements when it comes to address this licensing challenge in AI. So we've seen the Open Source Initiative taking a step forward with their AI Deep Dive program to assess what's the place of open source within AI, and even vice versa. We also have a newly announced initiative, the Open Weights for Open Weights by Oz Capital, Heather Meeker and Joseph Jacks, if I'm not mistaken. We have also in 2023 new types of licenses, such as the Big Code Open Rail license. So basically, this license was drafted under the Big Code project. Big Code was also an open and collaborative project following the line of Big Science, where a large language model for code generation was released. Now, the license is a very specific license for the model. enabling royalty-free access and use of the model, however, establishing a set of use restrictions. And moreover, within the license, we require that, first of all, also the model, when distributed, should have a similar set of use restrictions to the original one, but also the model, and taking the inspiration from open source licenses such as the Apache 2.0, the, let's say, modified version of the original model should include not just a license, a copy of the license, but also a copy of the model card or the data card released with the original model. And why? Because what we also want to promote with this type of ML-specific licenses is transparency and documentation within the AI value chain, right? And we all know that data cards and model cards are becoming, let's say, the main standard or the documentation standard in the community when willing to document basically the essential technical features of a machine learning model, even data provenance, the technical capabilities, or even technical limitations of the model, right? So you might find all this information within a high quality model card. And this, for the potential user, is super interesting. So we thought it was very pertinent to include this within the license. So every single time the model or a modified version of the model is going to be shared or reshared, also it should be accompanied by the documentation of the original model, right? And this is something that goes closely in parallel with the emerging or upcoming AI regulations, right? So I give you here, and I won't enter into the details, one of the examples, which is, as you may know, the EUA Act. And within the EUA Act, specifically for either general purpose AI systems, for high-risk AI systems, or even now also for foundational models, right? Even though the AI Act is not, let's say, has not reached their final version. But for all these three types of systems, you might have a lot of compliance-related requirements. Some of them, or a lot of them, dealing with transparency and documentation. And if you go to a model card, and a high quality model card, you realize that a lot of information asked or required by some of the articles of the EUA Act, such as Article 13 on transparency, a lot of this information might be also found within a model card. So you have also there kind of a match between a top-down approach to the governance of AI, which is the EUA Act, and the bottom-up approach to the governance of AI by the community, which is the model card as a documentation instrument, right? So it's very interesting to see how we can also basically, let's say, articulate responsible AI licenses in this case, or even broadly just AI-specific licenses with existing documentation tools within the community. And this is just for documentation and transparency-related purposes. But if you go, and even I will finish here, if you go to Article 4 for general purpose AI systems, if you want to commercialize a general purpose AI systems, or even release a general purpose AI systems, you have to explicitly forbid the use of the system for every single one of the specified high-risk scenarios within the EUA Act. This might be basically commercializing an AI system within the critical infrastructure context, which is an electric central, for instance, or within the job market or job applications context, within the educational context, right? So these are some examples where you should place the restrictions of the usage of your AI system. So I think one of the main, let's say, concerns right now within the EUA Act is how we are going to achieve to play a nice intersection between open access, or even open source, open licensing broadly, right, of large language models or AI, and these use restrictions, right? Because if you take an open source license and then you take the use restrictions of the EUA Act, so basically, you are not going to be able even to release a large language model if finally we don't have, let's say, some specific type of exceptions for open source. And this is something that it is being addressed right now within the legislative process. And it's something that could also be articulated within contractual or licensing terms of AI artifacts, right? So that's all, more or less. I know I've been maybe very quick. I don't know if you have some comments, some questions. Happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
We have one question about the open weights model from Joseph Jackson, OSS Capital. Why, to your mind, it would be critical to have, if you think, to have open weights, at least an open weights initiative?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's going to be critical as such. I think the time will tell the impact these type of initiatives are going to have. But definitely it causes a positive impact because it really forces the AI community, native, even the policymakers, to realize how to address this concern on specific type of licenses for new type of artifacts, right? And maybe open weights as such might be one of the triggers to start discussing even more these type of licensing issues.
Maybe a tough one. How we can keep the true original definition of open source with ethical license?
Oh, wow. So I think this one is a very delicate one. I can take both the personal perspective or even the Hugging Face perspective. So in Hugging Face, we are an open and neutral platform when it comes to licensing. Of course, every single user of the platform is going to be able to use or choose whatever license they want, right? So of course, we promote open source licenses. We also promote Creative Commons licenses, even source available licenses, or more specific ethical related licenses, right? So I think these type of different licensing initiatives should coexist. Now, to be clear, a responsible AI license is not an open source license, right? So an open source license is a license abiding by or respecting the core open source principles and the open source definition steered by the open source initiative. Sometimes when the license, let's say, enables open access or royalty-free access to the large language model, as it may be the Ray license, or even it may be the meta-specific licenses, right? People call this open source because open source has become a general term when referring to open access or open sharing of these type of artifacts. I think we should be careful, right? And really make the right distinctions. We, from the Rail initiative perspective and responsible AI licenses, we took inspiration from some of the open source core terms and values, but of course, our licenses from a Rail initiative hat or perspective I take right now are not open source license, just to be clear.
There recently Google Bard announced that they delayed the release in Europe because of privacy concerns and that Europe regulation have made. With the EU Act or GDPR or CCPA or PIPL in China, all privacy regulations, do you think we will finally have territorial licenses? Like you're allowed to use it only if it's in this country or in this area?
That's a very cool point. So first of all, EU policymakers, even the European data protection supervisor, I know they are aware of this type of even licensing or commercialization of AI systems and privacy-related issues. So of course, it's a core concern, and probably this solution or just this consequence might arise. So basically having territorial-based licenses when it comes to privacy-related regulations, right? Within the EU AI Act, it might happen even that companies are going to tailor specifically their contractual terms of their AI systems for the, let's say, compliance of the EU AI Act. And this also might take into account personal data related clauses, of course. What I can tell you also right now is that there's a debate within the EU institutions where they want, or at least the European Parliament has proposed in their last version, they have proposed that the Commission brings or defines standard contractual clauses for very specific terms in terms of compliance with the EU Act, and maybe data privacy or personal data under EU is one of them.
Yeah, one question: are you linked by any means to the ChatGPT, $100,000 competition for, let's say, moderation, or for, let's say, I don't remember exactly what it was like.
Not me, not me.
Sorry.
I think I'm not linked. I think even I don't know about the challenge.
No, it's like, I think they are giving like $100,000 to everyone who will propose a good framework for
Oh yeah, okay, that's it. Yeah, the democratic. Yeah, so something
democracy.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, open democratic challenge. Yeah, I read I read about it some time ago. I no, but from my in my standing, no, I am not participating on this.
Yeah, because transparency at some point can be considered a democratic approach. Yeah, a transparent license about what's inside, how we can use it or whatever is part of democracy at some point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, just to say hello to everyone because I wasn't seeing the screen with my shared screen. Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think so. Again, model cards, data cards are becoming the main standard when it comes to documentation and transparency within the AI community. Even you're starting to see how some companies are steering the concept of the model card from a documentation tool towards a regulatory compliance tool. You take a look at Meta's AI systems cards, or even Microsoft transparency notes, and they are doing a great job in terms of documentation of some of their AI systems. Even the documents, or let's say the information gathered within these specific cards, could be used from a compliance perspective under the EU Act. Within Hugging Face, I can tell you I developed, co-developed with a good colleague of mine, with Nima Boscarino. Actually, he developed the tool. I am a lawyer. But we conceived together what we call RegCheck. It's a space on Hugging Face. So basically, it justifies the hypothesis of that a high-quality model card can be used for regulatory compliance with the EU Act. So we developed a tool where the software is going to check, when you upload the model card, the compliance requirements of a specific article of the EU Act. In this case, it's just the Article 13. It was just, kind of a demo. But in the near term, we are going to see probably more of this kind of open tooling for everyone, specifically for SMEs or even for startups that they might need it.
Last question on because we've seen your CEO of Hugging Face, like Clément Delong, at the U.S. Congress, talking about open source and AI. Actually, to your mind, so you are experts doing open rail, framework, but do you feel regulators, policymakers really understand what's at stake and the technology behind it to know exactly what to do?
I don't think so. I think it's such a challenge for them. I've experienced it within the discussions of the EU Act. I think also at the same time we may criticize or not criticize or like or don't like their approach of the EU Act, but they are taking such a courageous standing on AI. I think, of course, it's from the policymaker perspective, is hard for them to really conceive or understand AI from a technical perspective, but also the competition or even economic dynamics of AI are even more of open source, right? So there are very different, let's say, dimensions of AI that now the policymakers are trying to address. The last version of the EU Act, to be honest, when it comes to open source, they are really trying to address and propose a specific exception for some open source models. So this is a big step forward, to be honest. But yes, it's currently a challenge for them, in my opinion.
How we can help, contribute, support, sponsor, where we can go?
Contribute to what?
No, to contribute to the discussion, to the license, to the...
Yeah, of course. So you may know, all of you Hugging Face. If you are interested in some of these type of discussions, for instance, the tool I just mentioned, the regulatory check tool, if I'm not mistaken, on Spaces is called RegCheck. I can share it with you afterwards if some of you are interested. It's an open space. So if you're interested about learning more or even developing a new version on an open basis, or just a new version for you, just open the community tab or even pick me up if you want, and we have a discussion about this licensing. I mean, I'm here, so whatever you want.
Perfect, Carlos. Thank you very much. So rec check or on Hugging Face or reaching you directly. Have a good one.
Thank you so
very
much.
much for.
Ciao.
Yes, so licenses are extremely important when you will publish your models and try to publish maybe your APIs on top of the models. But then there is an important question, when things are published, is like how you secure your LLM and NLP APIs, when you've built your own model and you build your APIs. So yeah, let's dive into a journey to avoid that data breaches, attacks, and more with Adam and Jared from Cohere. Hello,
hey,
Adam.
Well, thanks for having us. Hello and welcome. My name is Ads. I'm a senior security engineer at Cohere, and I've been in the network and security field for around 12 years or so. One of my main jobs at Cohere is to protect our application code as well as other tasks, be it Red Team or Blue Team. I'm a current member and contributor of the OWASP Top 10 for LLM project, which is an ongoing initiative to create open standard frameworks for guidance on building and maintaining LLM security.
Hey, I'm Jared. I'm a senior full stack engineer at Cohere. I work on the dashboard, the playground, all the stuff that users see, as well as the APIs behind the scene. I've been here about 2 years, and I've been doing web development stuff for about 10 years. Always been really interested in security and passionate about digital rights like privacy, net neutrality. So fun to see some of that overlap with the new field of AI.
Yeah, Cohere is an AI company that offers a chatbot called Coral as well as other natural language processing solutions. Our aim of this presentation is to educate the wider community on the topic of LLM API security, as well as we being advocates of the current space. So we kind of want to take a spin, scratch it, run it back a little. We're thinking how best to do this, and instead wanting to give you a spin on our take of the Wild West, a rapidly dynamic space, which is LLM API security. We intend to let you know what we've learned, stuff we've witnessed, what we're currently interested in, and what we might be concerned about as enthusiasts. I spend a bunch of my time outside of work as a security researcher, ethically identifying bugs. So I love what I do. I'm always up for a good conversation. So I encourage you to connect with us after this.
So I'll go over what we're going to be covering on a high level. The aim of this discussion is to highlight some of the rapidly growing NLP and LLM spaces in the AI field. We're also going to talk about common API use cases for these technologies and how security is an ongoing concern with every new technology. We're going to discuss a lot of things at high level, followed by some takeaways from a security perspective. And then we'll do a bit of a deeper look at some examples of common vulnerabilities in LLMs and proof of concepts of things you can see today. So we'll go over some basics. I think many people know this, but just to cover the bases, LLM is a large language model. So these are the driving force behind the current revolution in AI and NLP chatbots, and they're used to power many of the largest language models in the world. And it's the basis of what we work with at Cohere. So some examples of current LLMs that are out there, the Cohere Playground, which we work on, OpenAI's ChatGPT, which you've probably heard of, Google Bard, BERT. There's a lot of stuff going on. The space is growing very quickly, which I think a lot of people are aware of. NLP is natural language processing specifically, which is a branch of computer science that kind of deals with the interaction between computers and humans in natural language. So the goal of LLMs is to enable computers to understand, interpret, and generate human language, which we kind of call NLP as a whole. So some examples that you probably know of: speech recognition, chat assistant, support bots, language translation, but really there's a lot in the field. So just high level, when it comes to LLM APIs, it's basically a large model served through an API and providing endpoints to handle requests. A user would provide text, they'd provide some config. The API would interact with the large model, get a response, and then return generated text or values for whatever you're looking to analyze with text. Common use case might be something like Amazon Alexa when you ask it about the weather.
So basically, we're going to take a spin on this now. What you might be thinking, where does security fit in, which we'll pivot to. So let's start with an external resource. This is not something specifically from a material or a tabletop exercise that we used, but this is a snip of a threat modeling exercise. To threat model, we first need to define what is a vulnerability. A vulnerability to me is a weakness in an information system, procedure, control, or implementation that could be exploited or triggered by a threat source. A threat itself can be identified through the process of threat modeling. We can use this exercise to pre-anticipate, assess vulnerabilities, to remediate and or reduce risk. Threat modeling, as a definition for me, is involving the process of understanding a system's goals from a business objective, mapping out the components responsible for them, and then recursively identifying system and performance criteria down to the essence of the implementation. So what I'm kind of showing you here is a sample of the exercise which could be used when threat modeling a chatbot, i.e. an LLM API, right? The dotted line down the middle of the infographic is the perimeter, which represents the external client interaction with the API endpoint. We label this trust boundary 1. Which is a point of potential injection attacks. It's a two-way boundary because we can't always explicitly trust always both the input, being the user's text input or whatever that may be, as well as the LLM's output, i.e. the response to the client. The data can be manipulated from the initial client to LLM interaction and insufficiently sanitized or blocked on the return path. We then have two smaller dotted lines to the right of an infographic, kind of going a bit further, which represent the internal infrastructure where our API endpoint hooks into our ecosystem. Trust boundary 2, as you see in the top right, needs to mitigate the impact of an LLM passing indirect input directly into an executive function or modifying the presentation of a cross-site scripting attack payload. Trust boundary 3 needs to mitigate the ability for either the LM or an external user to gain access to sensitive data stores, since by nature, the LMs themselves do not adhere to authorization controls internally. This would be like your classic SSRF or server-side request forgery attack. Moving forward and staying at a high level, what we're doing is we're taking trust boundary 1 and we're using a stride table to illustrate strengths and weaknesses which we can label against that trust boundary. Stride is just one of standard publicly available frameworks, which is common in threat modeling exercises. Each letter in the name corresponds to a specific threat category that can identify strengths and weaknesses in a system and create those theoretical mappings. Stride being spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, or elevation of privilege.
So let's go over some of the examples of a few attack methodologies and tactics that we're going to talk about in this presentation. So we're going to talk about prompt hacking, which has a lot of different names right now as it's a new kind of area. So some people call it jailbreaks. There's adversarial prompting, but basically messing with prompts when interacting with an AI chatbot. We're going to talk about prompt injection. That's stuff like cross-plugin request forgery, package hallucinations, which is a personal favorite because it's so crazy, and then cross-site scripting. Then we'll touch on training data poisoning at the end.
Thank you. So give it maybe the GIF aside. This is a disclaimer. The information contained in this slide is not a direct vulnerability of a specific company, organization, or service. It's recommended to never perform these type of detections without explicit consent. We're not trying to create a double standard here, but effectively just want you all to understand some of the concerns in the space and what we're witnessing as you look to explore building your own API applications that integrate or provide AI solutions. So what we're seeing here is two infographics. At a high level, this is CPRF, which is cross-plugin request forgery. Here we have an example from Embracer Red, which is used, which is the researcher. The exploit is used to trick an LM into stealing private email information without the user knowing. This is caused by a confused deputy attack. This is where a computer program that is tricked by another program, which has fewer privilege levels or less rights, into misusing its own authority on a system, which is a specific type of privilege escalation. So what does the exploit chain look like? The screenshot on the left, you can see that the attacker hosts malicious LLM instructions, which you can see are literally written in basic HTML here. The malicious instructions manipulate the LLM. On the screenshot on the right, you can see that the victim visits a malicious site with the chatbot-enabled browser plugins, such as like WebPilot is an example, that one way you can integrate that. The LM reads, interprets the malicious instructions, which triggers a prompt injection, and the instructions of the website can take control of the chatbot. Thus, the chatbot follows the instructions, retrieves the user's email, summarizes it, URL encodes it, and uploads it to a third-party website. And think about the ramifications of this type of attack that could be case with additional instructions, which is wild, like in terms of how broad this potentially could go. You may also be thinking, like, what if the site the victim was not malicious? Well, how do you know that that hasn't been prior injected with embedded instructions that you may not see when, on your average browser, but if you inspect the web page, maybe you find out.
So if there's any developers watching, you may be thinking about cores, because I think in traditional web development, web application development, cores comes to mind when you think about some service that you're using making contact with other services. Cores is basically just used in traditional web applications. It's a way of telling the browser what other APIs it's allowed to contact after contacting your API. But since with LLM APIs, there is the user contacts the API and then the action takes place on the server side, this type of a solution doesn't work as well for this type of mitigation.
So again, playing on the confused deputy, what I'm basically showing is the same kind of attack methodology, but what we're showing here is a lack of verification for user confirmation when enabling plugins, which is spreading to leaks, code repositories, and a similar takeover fashion. So this is another example of the same kind of attack, but just another vector, so it seems. Code injection, what does it look like in code? So this input and output block lists are a method to blocking malicious prompts against generative AI. Scalable methods include machine learning classifiers. Additionally, alternatively, you can use reinforcement learning, which is effectively training a bad LLM to teach a good LLM what is within the guardrails around safety and ethics in ML. What we're showing here is an open source framework of repository, which is designed to simplify the creation of application using large language models used by developers. This is an identified bug shown as a vulnerable chain, which is subject to prompt injection at the code level. Chains are what you get by connecting one or more large language models in a logical fashion. PAL, as you can see from the images, stands for Program Aided Language Model. The PAL chain reads complex math problems described in natural language and generates programs for solving the math problem, but offloads the step to a runtime such as a Python interpreter, while any kind of like specific standardization leaves that therefore increased risk. Another one we're going to talk about here is cross-site scripting and data exfiltration using prompt injection. So similar kind of technique. Basically, what we're showing here at a high level is that the adversary has full control of what the chatbot is doing when a prompt injection occurs. In the exploit, the LM API returns text. It can return markdown elements, which the client will render as HTML. The LM API reads directly from the website that is currently being viewed within the browser. The exploit chain would look such as, on the left-hand side screenshot, a malicious bash script is hosted on a remote server. The LM API is instructed to view the contents from the interaction between the chatbot and the user's web browser. Then the LM is manipulated by the instructions present to perform actions which result in a cross-site scripting attack. I really encourage you to kind of further check out the POCs here, which actually some of them do include video demos, so you can get a better kind of illustration when you have additional time to go through that.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about LLM hallucination. I actually find this one pretty fascinating. But basically, LLM hallucinations are just when a large model makes stuff up or confirms things to be real that aren't real. And there's a pretty interesting attack where a hallucination can be taken advantage of. in a similar way to like an NPM supply chain attack or any sort of package manager attack where somebody trusts a package and it gets taken over by a new owner and there's an exploit added, or a package is artificially added and built up so that people add it to their projects, and then that's an attack vector. So when it comes to APIs that work with LLMs, how does this work? Well, basically, what will happen is an attacker will go and look, try to make generations for code requests and look for hallucinations that talk about packages or resources that don't exist. They'll then verify that there's no package like that, and then they'll go and publish the package themselves, adding their own software into there or code, and basically masquerade it as a legitimate package, hoping that the hallucination continues for new users. So then a legitimate user will ask the same question. They'll get the same hallucination, but now there's a real package there when they go to download it. And then all of a sudden the user thinks they've gotten information that's very reliable, and it actually is more of a supply chain attack. Basically, even though NLP is a very useful tool and we think it's very valuable and interesting, it needs to be approached in the same way that you approach all new types of software that you're learning about that are being developed, cautiously, thinking about security, and integrating it in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, because I mean, LLM hallucination is LLMs are not perfect, so hallucination is expected. So there's a responsibility on both parties, I would say.
Yep.
So how can we mitigate this risk, or how can we try, right? As an LLM API developer, you can enhance your experience of LLMs with ongoing vulnerability scanning of your models, kind of similar to how you would do with like a traditional web application. Here we're demonstrating the process of certain types of techniques, injection and payloads, which can be tested through LLM vulnerability scanners. Effectively, what's happening is it's enumerating prompt techniques, some of which are shown earlier, to LLM API endpoints against specific probes, which is simply a set of data sets and techniques. Again, just want to kind of illustrate this is not something that we built or I built, but is something going on in the open source community. Again, really quickly, building on the previous slide, effectively illustrating here the basic output analysis from the initial scanning techniques to measure output against input, so we can verify adequate sanitization is being applied on both ends. Think of that as the input and output we described on the perimeter trust boundary. We're back to our threat modeling, right?
So this is an interesting resource. Basically, the Institute for Ethical AI and Machine Learning has put out kind of a mapping between traditional OWASP vulnerabilities to things you can use in a modern ML-based API. So for developers that are looking to kind of get an understanding of the space and map concepts that they're familiar with to new kind of ideas for new threat models, this is a great resource. There's a lot here, but for example, stuff like broken access control mapping to, unrestricted model endpoints. But really, I recommend you go check this out at the Institute of Ethical AI and Machine Learning.
Yeah,
there's a lot there.
It's a great resource. We have traditional API security, but we also need to apply almost like an additional layer at this point. And kind of what we're talking about in the next slide here, we're looking at current frameworks within an early life cycle of a technology which is rapidly developing at scale. So highlighting some of the ongoing efforts to build frameworks and guardrails for security LLM APIs due to the recent acceleration. Many of these are in obviously early stages of development. These frameworks allow us as practitioners and developers to build code and AI applications in all realms of security concerns with best practices and safety and security in mind. Thank you. So how is Cohere participating in the community around LLM security? We're proud to be enthusiastic participants of the DEF CON AI Village this year and to have our LLMs tested by dedicated security researchers. I myself am a contributor of the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs and been selected as part of its core team, which will be going through the final cycles of the project before it finally gets published. It's effectively preparing a top list of large language model projects on an accelerated timetable in response to rapid development and deployment of LLMs in the space. We also embed and bake this wealth of knowledge and expertise into our LLM University and hope to have a security section in the near future. So we're pretty much about time. We'd like to thank you for your time, for having us, listening to us. We had a blast, and I hope you have the awesome rest of your conference. We wanted to kind of allow a couple of minutes. I'm not sure if we have much time for questions, but anything we cannot answer immediately, we request if you can take some follow-up notes, details, and we can get back to you. Again, really encouraged to connect. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. A great presentation. Some comments in the different chats and threads and streams. One question: like, we are organizing a conference on API security called API Secure. So just on API security, and we found that the large industry is not ready yet for just classic REST API or whatever security and now. All these new threats, now a new layer, like, oh man, this is like a new dimension, like prompt injection and hallucination. I don't know, overflow. I don't know how we call them. It's even funny. We're creating the names, like we're creating the name of the attacks. It's so new, right? It's so fresh.
I mean, like I say, we're enthusiasts, we're advocates. We're obviously watching this space, right? But that's where we kind of go back to things like the threat modeling. We go back to what we know and the available frameworks we do currently have to try and put in what we have in place. As a community together, we can obviously work on those frameworks and build those alignments like we currently kind of have for those traditional web applications, API security. Some of the exploits we kind of went to, I'm sure a lot of developers have kind of dealt with those kind of issues, and they've maybe relied on those frameworks. So.
And additionally, I think an interesting thing in the security space is that threats can be viewed as being very negative, but I think there's a very strong community that's always growing of bug hunters and ethical hackers and that type of thing. And really what that ends up doing is protecting users. So people finding bugs like this means we fix them, and the user is safer in the long run, at least in theory.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. So one question about like the ability for, let's say, a starting company on LLMs and to secure their LLM APIs. Just when you see ChatGPT got leaked, there were 100,000 account leak. It's mostly classic account leakage, but when you see Microsoft integration of ChatGPT, like where they have been able to break the barriers, like the moderation barriers, like even the top players are being tricked. Let's call it like that, right? With their the injections or so. Like, how today a company which doesn't have their size or their means is able to navigate into all what you shared? It's just like hide and seek and just like how they can do that.
I think the some of these resources, like the Institute for Ethical AI one that I talked about, I really like that approach of like, okay, you already think about these types of things. Really, a new space is still security if you kind of map it to the metaphor of like, we're not necessarily talking about cores necessarily, but we're talking about like, think about like how are requests made in whatever space they're in this new. I don't think that's like a full solution, but I think the kind of transcending values of security can move from step to step.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to get across in that slide, but just by mentioning cores, for example, is we're trying to give like a realistic version for what developers who are currently listening to us, enthusiasts in the space, are currently aware of, and kind of apply that same logic, really.
So do you think at some point it's so hard, so difficult that actually platforms like Cohere and others will be there to guarantee a certain level of security, if you trust them to host your models?
Sorry, what was the question?
No, the question is like, it seems quite a lot of things to think about. Mm-hmm. And so do you think there's a huge opportunity for company like Cohere or like yours, right? Your company or others to actually host LLM, and provide it as a service for others, because you will handle security versus if people have to do it themselves.
Oh yes, sorry. So I think I understand. So yeah, as in I expect there will be some kind of rapid acceleration around security companies selling LLM security as a service, as it would maybe even be labeled, right? Yeah. So I definitely would agree. I think that will be.
Yeah, and I think in kind of the news space, being interested in security over the years, one of the problems is that it's very difficult to get people to think about security, get users to care about security. And I think that the things that work best are like the easy ones, that it's actually easier to do the secure thing than not to. So if you can get someone to actually install a password manager and then use it and have it in their browser, once they get there, it becomes easier. But I think with AI and LLM stuff, especially NLP, some of the responsibility is twofold, where some of it, I think it's an easier space to teach people about security because it's about text and people are interacting not with like, okay, what's this program I'm going to download and use and what are all the security things? And they already don't understand what they're using. Now they're just talking and we're teaching them like, how do you talk safely? Or how do you read safely, or what are you looking for? So at least my hope is optimistic that it's an easier space to partner with users. But it's a new space, so it's hard to say.
An exciting one.
Yeah.
really, really exciting. And I think you shared this excitement with all of us. Thank you very much for having been with us at API Days, Ads and Jared. And we'd love to invite you in at other conferences because, a lot of good feedbacks on the different streams about your talk. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having us, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. And now we continue our AI journey, right, with Grace Francisco, who is at Pangea, about the new developer dance. Hey, Grace, how are you?
Great. Hi, Mehdi. Thank you. Super happy to be here.
Yeah, really happy to have you. So let's share what you have for us, and let's go.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I know that for many of you, you've been going from session to session here. And let me get this going to the next slide. And so you can't get away from the fact that you probably need to take a little bit of a break. And so I'm going to help you with that because we're actually going to do a dance. So let me facilitate that right now. Since we're very short on time, I did have a video on this, but the video doesn't actually work. So we're going to do this live. So follow along with me. I'm going to go left, but for you, it's going to look a little bit in reverse. So I'm going to go left, left, and I'm going to slide right. Do that one more time. Left, left, and slide right. This is much more fun in person, I promise. But hopefully you got a little bit of a physical break there. That was my video. That's not going to work. And now I'm going to provide you with a proper introduction of who I am. I am a global expert around what is called developer relations and developer strategy. I've been doing this for a very long time, 15 plus years. And I've been very fortunate to work for companies like IBM, Microsoft, Intuit, Atlassian, Roblox. Many of you who have kids in your ecosystem probably know Roblox very well. Those were the youngest developers I've ever worked with. And I'm now the CMO and head of developer relations at a cybersecurity company called Pangea. And our audience for Pangea is all about developers and helping to meet the needs of security within the code for developers, meeting them where they're at. So that's a little bit about me. Now let me explain what this dance is all about. Many of you have heard this term shift left security, and that's been around for a bit. But shift left security is really about looking at code that's already been built, doing static or dynamic analysis, monitoring that code. So that's all after the code's already been built, it's been deployed somewhere, and that's great. And you're going to continue to need to do that. But the thing that's always been a gap is helping developers actually put in security functionality within their code and meeting them where they're at. Because, the reality is most developers are not security experts, and they've not given the time to necessarily acquire those very deep skills. And so meeting them where they're at with APIs is super important for us to be able to deliver secure user experiences. And I'm going to tell you why this is so incredibly important today. But before I do that, I want to reminisce a little bit about my heyday being a software developer way back when. And I remember just that feeling of like clickety-clack on the keyboard and coding, getting to what I called my coding groove. You're in that coding groove and you're coding away and you get something built. That immediate gratification of building something and seeing it run, you all know what I'm talking about. That's our happy space, right? So when we talked about shift left of left is giving you that security functionality where you're asked, you can drop it into your code, and that sliding right is that coding groove that we're talking about, feeling good about getting things done and innovating, right? So that's what we're trying to enable with that concept of that dance, right? Now, this is usually a live audience, but I wanted to answer this question for yourselves. How many of you have had to deal with a security issue? I'm guessing that many of you are raising your hands going, yes, headache, yes, which is true for most people, as you can imagine. And yet, you see these articles all the time. We are still ignoring the need for security in software. This is a terrible situation to be in. It needs to change fast. Did you know that in 2022, there's been estimated $2.41 trillion in terms of costs to U.S. businesses? That's double the U.S. debt, double. 2.41 trillion. That's just the estimation. We think that's actually a lot larger than that from bad software. We're shipping bad software every day. Now, again, answer for yourself. Have you knowingly submitted code that might not be secure? Now, you're in the room by yourself, so you're probably raising your hands because no one else can see. But this is so true for so many people. In fact, Secure Code Warrior released a survey report on the number of people that admitted 67%. I think this number is actually quite a bit higher. People are really being honest in their responses in this survey, but 67% said, yes, admittedly, I'm shipping code with vulnerabilities that I know about. Now, many of you are probably thinking, well, this is not going to happen to me. I'm not going to have anyone hacking away at my code. It'll be okay. But the reality is these hackers are getting faster and faster at getting to 0-day flaws. In fact, it went from something like 42 days on average in exploiting a 0-day flaw to 12 days. 12 days. And it's probably getting even faster with AI. And again, answer for yourself. And hopefully you know the answer is most of you, in fact, are probably raising your hands. You are dealing with PII in your application code. If you have anything that has a web interface or a mobile interface, any application interface, you are probably dealing with PII, personally identifiable information, like phone numbers, like email addresses. And GDPR is probably applicable to even if you're not in Europe, because that actually follows EU citizens no matter where they are in the world. So these are things that are of concern for most application developers. And when we think about that, sometimes that gets abstracted away like, oh, it's this big complex compliance thing, but there are personal implications to you, to your family, to your friends. This can result in people not being able to get medical care that they need because their PII has been breached and they're unable to get medical care and insurance because they've had their identity stolen. Or in this case that's covered here, this woman was stalked by an ex-boyfriend who was able to get her information because it was breached. So these things have real personal cascading issues to many of us and to our friends and family. And that's something that we need to really embrace as a software developer community. We can't keep thinking about this as an afterthought. And fast food held hostage. Many of you, I know, you're busy, you're getting fast food. This was in the UK. 300 fast food chains were shut down because they were held hostage. All of their data was taken from them. They weren't able to get back into their own servers. And the sad thing about that is they kind of proclaimed, oh, it's okay. And one day we're able to turn this around. The ransomware case only took over corporate data, no PII, no consumer information was breached. Well, sadly, 83 days later, they actually had to admit that, in fact, yes, consumer data was, in fact, breached. And the sad reality is the mean time to resolution for many of these web-facing applications is 58 days. 58 days. That was worse than the 58 days. There's so much in the news that we need to be thinking about and really embracing the responsibility around. Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. I know many of you remember this, especially in the news when people are going to gas stations and filling these plastic bags. They were in a panic about not having fuel in the peak of summer, right? So they were going to gas stations filling up with fuel. This is a serious attack on the U.S. environment, right? U.S. infrastructure, and that actually took quite a bit of time, and the ransom was actually paid out. But the solution took so long that they actually had to go to their default backup plans to get things back up and running. Now, the sad reality about that is these gas pipeline facilities, they're not covered under the same mandates federally around their security protocols. And so they're on really old software that is so prone to attack. And that is a sad situation for us. 5,000 miles of pipeline were impacted. 5,000 miles. This was across the entire US seaboard. Seriously bad situation. Because imagine this. What if it had been in the middle of winter? In fact, an example of this that had nothing to do with a cyber attack happened in Austin twice, 2021, 2023, right? And we had people actually die, right? The rolling outages of electricity actually impacts gas. So it turns out these are very intertwined utilities. You cannot have gas without electricity. You cannot have electricity without gas. And when there's rolling outages and you also take down some of the gas pipeline facilities, you put millions of people at risk that are literally freezing to death. Now, while that was not a cybersecurity attack, it could have been, because remember, those gas pipeline facilities aren't under the same mandates, security protocols, and quality that their electrical utility counterparts have. So we should be very, very afraid what could happen there in the middle of winter. And then many of you still fresh in your mind, SolarWinds hack, supply chain attack that we've never seen. Thousands of developers, thousands of hackers were involved in this organized hack. It even impacted big organizations like Microsoft. And I know this is still fresh for many of you. Log4j, I know many of you woke up going, oh, we don't use Log4j. And then you realize, oh, actually, the application that I depend on underneath does use Log4j. That's what actually happened over the weeks and months, is that people didn't realize how Log4j is embedded in so much software today. So, oh my God, now you're going, what happened to my happy coding days, right? Because now you're stuck in the middle of these remediations of all these threats and re-architecting your code and dealing with all of these problems now in your application software. And then you look at the landscape of cybersecurity that's so complex, and there are so many players, and none of those players in this map are doing anything specific to help you, the developer, right? These are things that you would have to hack away at to make it work within your software. So yes, those happy coding days, that sliding grooving to the right and feeling good and coding away. Oh man, it's going to feel like a distant memory, but we don't want that for you. And the sad reality, the presenter was talking about ChatGPT and generative AI. It is truly a threat, but it's here to stay because it does have benefits, right? So we need to think about how we're protecting ourselves when we are in this era of so much adoption around not just ChatGPT, but a bunch of different generative AI solutions. And the scary component of this is that the rapid adoption of this, people just aren't thinking about the potential threats to them, right? And so I wrote a couple articles about this. I also wrote an article about ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT about its own security concerns about itself. And it admittedly said, hey, look, when you put in PII, any confidential information into an LLM, you are inherently putting things that may be unencrypted and can be prone to a breach and attack. right? And people don't think about that when they're putting their prompts and asking questions and creating new content. And we saw with the Samsung situation that even IP, like in hardware companies, IP is everything. It's gold. IP was being put into this thing, right? And now it belongs to OpenAI. They've been banned. ChatGPT has been banned in places like Italy because they're unable to comply with things like GDPR and protect them from breaches. So that is something to really think about. And the reverse of this is the output. So the previous presenter talked about hallucinations, right? The output can be so confident, right? And it feels like a human response. This is the dangers. It comes back and it's so confident in the response that it will make up responses in some cases where it doesn't truly have an answer. And it is possible for it to send you content and links that will send you to a phishing site that will be a malicious link. And you need to think about how you secure both the inputs and the outputs that are coming back. And so that's where solutions like Pangea can help to make sure that your environment is secure. We have an open source project that demonstrates how you can do that. So check that out. Now, lastly, before I run out of time, I want to tell you a short story about why all of this is so very important. So I heard this story recently about these two women walking along a stream, and they heard this child crying. He was drowning in the water. They both jumped in to save this child. They pull him out. And then right after they get out, there's another child screaming, and they both jump in again to save this child. And yet, oh my God, what a third one? How can that be? And yet they're both exhausted, jumping in to save this third child. By the fourth time, one of the women is going the opposite direction. Her friend is in the water trying to save the fourth child and saying, "Where on earth are you going? We have to save this child." And the woman says, "I'm going upstream where there is someone throwing the children in the water and stopping them." Does this sound like anything familiar in all of this that we've been talking about? So unknowingly, as software developers, we are throwing the kids, and the kids are ourselves and our community and our users, right, that are using our application software today. We're throwing them in the water and they're flailing. We're all flailing because of all this insecure software that's out there in the world. And that is kind of equivalent to, we always talk about we want to innovate, we have to innovate at speed, we got to push things out, but it's equivalent to shipping the fastest car in the world with no safety belt. We have to stop doing that. So CISA has recently been publishing alongside the NSA and other 6 nation states around this need for software developers in the vendor community to embrace our responsibility finally around securing our software, making and delivering software that is secure user experiences at the end of the day and by default. So important, right? And so they have actually published a white paper that talks about secure by design principles and secure by default and what it takes to deliver that. And it is a culture shift that we all need to embrace in terms of that responsibility. So I need you all to really consider this. I need you to consider that you need to continually educate. I know many of you are, and you're investing in this, and it does take time, but this is a continual education process around the security components, the security requirements and compliance pieces, and we need to do that. And I would say also we as leaders, engineering leaders, developer leaders, security leaders, we need to help lead that culture shift and take that responsibility as a community and make it top of mind for you and your fellow developers. Security is about safety, going back to that safety harness and the racing car. And then really learning through every retro and incident response, treating this as an agile experience. And I would advocate, I have a couple of slides on this, but I'm short on time. Women are especially suited for this. So keep hiring women, because women from the day they're walking outside on their own are thinking about security all the time. It's top of mind for us already. So it becomes top of mind in conversations, especially when it comes to application security and user experiences. The other thing to think about is really those solutions that you need in the development lifecycle from the very beginning, from when you're designing, when you're doing the requirements, and really practicing it in code. And when I say in code, you got to meet developers where they are, because not everyone is into security and cybersecurity and understands all the nuances and the needs of that. So meet them where they are with solutions that they can drop in the code, like Pangea. Excuse me. So you can start delivering a lot of those secure experiences now. Happy to answer questions. You can also find us on our Slack channel on Pangea.cloud. There's a link there to our Slack channel, and it's free to start. And you don't need security expertise to get going on that. So would be happy to see more people joining the community and helping with this culture shift we all need to get to. Again, this is part of a holistic set of other solutions you need to be thinking about, but we need to stop throwing the kids in the stream. So help me, help you, help our users, and help our community. This is super important. Now remember, the dance, right? You want to shift left, and then slide right. This is the thing that I want you to remember. It is a dance. It's a good dance. You want to get back to that good coding groove, innovating at speed, but delivering safe user experiences. And with that, I'm leaving you with this one slide. Remember the dance, and that shift left of left is all about embedding security from day one with design and coding it by default. And getting back to your good coding groove and continuing to innovate. Thank you. This is my speedy version of this presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Grace. Like it really seems that 2.4 trillion, right? This is what you said, right, about the bad software.
That's the estimated amount. It's probably a lot more than that. They were still calculating the amount.
Yeah. So that's really twice
the U.S. debt.
Yeah.
Twice.
Yeah. So, but to your mind, you talk about the mindset. You talk about a lot of things. The tools are also there. More and more tools, more and more platforms. But let's say for you, what's the low-hanging fruit?
The low-hanging fruit is this: being able to call APIs into the code and not requiring your developers to build all that security expertise from day one. Not everyone's going to get there at the same speed. Not everyone gets the luxury of time to do it. Excuse me. So it's super important to meet them where they're at and provide them with things like Okta, right, for Authn, or Pangea for Redact and Embargo, and Intel services to help you understand the URLs and files that you're working with and the threat they might be presenting you.
Yeah, so there is a saying I like in security is that security was too important 20 years ago to let someone else to do it for you, but now security is too important to do it yourself, right? So it's better to let someone do it for you. Do you agree with that one?
It is something that it has to be a collaborative community process, right? So when I talked about the culture shift, right now in many organizations, there's this wall of friction between devs and security. That needs to come down. We need to work together in order for this to change.
We also one question about why you named Pangea. Is there any specific reason? Because you gather all the continents into one.
It's about bringing all the continents into one. It's about bringing all of these fragmented cybersecurity solutions that aren't in one platform to one developer platform to make it very easy for developers to use.
So you had a lot of experience in large software companies. Today, with the new LLM, Ferrandis, and this new and the talk we had before showing all the new attacks that actually LLM provides. Do you think what's the opportunity, but what's also the threat, that companies are facing, and why security is even more important than ever?
LLMs are here to stay, right? They're not going away because they do actually help with content generation, with solution generation, with coding in some cases. So we should expect that to be here. The threats that I talked about and helping users understand what they should not be putting in there in terms of PII, make sure it's redacted properly so it doesn't end up unencrypted into the LLM itself, because that then has this potential of breaching the PII in other places that it's not meant to be. And then protecting the users for the potential output that comes back in the response, right? Because again, it's conversational. It feels like humans giving the response. It's making sure that they're not clicking on malicious links, going to malicious sites, and understanding that, hey, the response isn't perfect. I mean, right now, we're in the infancy toddler phase of all of this. And we need to be cognizant of that. And there's still a lot of training and teaching and awareness that we need to drive as a technical community to especially accommodate users who have no idea. They think that the responses are perfect responses that they can use. We've seen incidences where a lawyer was disbarred recently because it was using content that was generated from a hallucination from an LLM that sounded so true, but none of it was true, right? So this is happening on a regular basis right now.
So yeah, totally understand. So let's, as a last word, so what's the reminder? It's like shift left,
slide right.
Oh, okay.
You got it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Grace. Thank you for your presentation.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Cheers. And so we'll finish this second segment on let's say LLMs with a fireside chat with Brenton House, who is an API evangelist, who is a YouTube influencer now, right, with a great YouTube channel, and also an experienced and an expert on APIs and API management. Hello, Brenton. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us for API's interface. We were trying to kind of wrap up maybe I don't know if you have listened to the 10 talks we had on LLMs and APIs and stuff, but you know your topic too. The thing is, it's coming, it's there, but API management is also there. LLMs, they're really like, you know, how you consume LLMs, how you protect your API, and how do you integrate these LLMs, how you distribute your content and your APIs into LLMs. So there are many things we can talk about, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about you, what are you currently doing, and also what you are, where we can find more of your content and videos.
Oh, sure. Well, I can start off. I've been in the API game for like 25 some years right now. I've worked on everything from mobile apps to cybersecurity and even AI, and all of it shows like how APIs have been this core essential part of digital transformation, how businesses are transforming over the years. And I mean, we're to the point now where obviously we have conferences on APIs. I mean, APIs now, especially with AI becoming more of a public facing thing with ChatGPT going public, the word API has been used a lot more by people that have never used that word before. And so not only in the business world, but we're seeing it everywhere. So yeah, I'm really excited about being able to chat about how this intersection of API management, AI and LLMs, and how it all kind of goes together. So yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, and maybe we will start by, we had a lot of people defining LLMs this morning, but like, let's say if we go back, we're an API conference, we're talking about LLMs, but we're an API conference. So maybe you can start, what would be your definition about API management? How would you define API management?
I mean, I guess to keep it kind of simple, API management as core is just kind of about building, designing, deploying everything about an API and doing all of that securely. So all the stages of an API are really part of API management. And I mean, a lot of the focus on API management gets put on the latter part, because once your APIs are in production, a lot of that managing, setting up policies, doing different things to make sure that they're working right. But really, you have to start from the beginning of an API to make sure that by the time you're at the end in production, that you can manage it correctly. So, I mean, there's a lot of different definitions, and as you know, I mean, places like Gartner and others, you start kind of change the definition as things mature, businesses change, APIs change. You almost start changing the definition. We've seen in the last couple of years of even what API management means to analysts like Gartner.
Yeah, no, thank you for this definition. Then my question will be like, with the previous speaker, I asked this question. And so to put the business first before diving into APIs and LLM, 20 years ago, most marketers used to say, if you're not crawled by Google and by search engines, you don't exist. If you don't allow your website to be crawled, nobody will go by your email address. They will go from the search engine research, and that they will index you and find you, right? So if LLMs are the next UI, or text is the next UI at some point, whatever the LLM, ChatGPT or Mistral or Bloom or whatever, or Bing Chat and others, will you exist if you don't let your website or APIs consumed by LLMs? That's the question. I would love to have your opinion on that.
Oh, this is huge, and I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know our focus is on APIs and AIs, but this is going to be absolutely huge and disruptive. And I started doing a couple of new video series kind of on AI and touching on a lot of marketing because it's such a big impact on every business. But yes, you had to be indexed by Google before. You had people whose their sole job was to define how you could best create SEO, make sure that your site was picked up. Your goal was to be in the top 10 of the search results. And now all of a sudden, within a year, I'm guessing everything is going to change. And you kind of wonder, like, why now? I mean, Google's had the best of AI minds for years and years. And the reason is not only is it going to change search results, but it's going to change search ads. And that's probably a big reason that Google kind of postponed releasing anything similar to like ChatGPT or Bard until they were kind of, their hand was forced, was because they make a lot of money in Google ads, and that this is going to change ads as well. So what does it mean to be indexed by an LLM? I mean, a lot of it with some of the models, you don't even know if your information is in the LLM. I mean, there's all the legality around now about is copyrighted stuff in there? Where did they get their sources of information? But with some of the open models of LLMs, I think that's going to be a little more transparent, hopefully, with what information is going in there. But then you're also going to have private LLM. So, I mean, you're going to take a base model, and then I think I would forecast that within a couple of years, it's going to be essential for businesses to have their own LLM, their own model that they take a base model, because I mean, it takes a lot of money to build the big models, but then take that base model and start building it with your own information that you can use for your business. That's very specific to either your industry or your organization. And that is going to be a huge benefit to organizations as well. So, but that won't necessarily be public facing. But I think the question still is, how do you make sure that your information that you put on your that you have out there gets picked up by, say, ChatGPT or Bard or one of the other models? Because, or if it does, how can you make sure that your brand is seamlessly interwoven into the answer so that it stands out, that your brand, you don't lose all your branding just because you put some information on the website? So I think you've hit on a really key topic that I know I'm going to be watching really closely.
Yeah, so from search engine optimization, SEO, to LLM-AO, like a large language model answer optimization or something like that. I don't know, but it will be something. So it's just to put the stage right about like why it may be important then to mix your APIs with that. But then let's talk about the first part. The first part is what we call, what you used to call integration, like how you can integrate third-party services or even sometimes your own legacy services into your new product. Right. I love the fact that APIs are no product, so we talk about consumption. We consume APIs sometimes when they are really delightful. We consume them, we don't integrate them. But the thing is, then on an API management perspective, what would you advise? What do you think we need to consider when we need to consume these ChatGPT APIs, maybe future Google Bard APIs, or all these LLM APIs, like about all what they bring into our system, about and all the problems that can come with it, right?
Right. So I think all of this push for, especially for generative AI, and as you know, a lot of the stuff about ChatGPT, I mean, they had their, say, a plugin system that's about integrating, taking external information and bringing it and say into ChatGPT. But you have the other side, which is you have that huge and more powerful GPT API, along with some of the other AI APIs that people are going to want AI in their app almost more than they want their app inside their AI, like they do with the ChatGPT plugins. So it's going to be even more essential that your data is accessible by APIs. So although we've had for years a big push of, hey, you need to make sure your data is in APIs because that's how machines talk to each other. That's how apps talk to each other with the smartphone growth and everything. They all use APIs. But now, not only are you going to have to make sure that you can reach out and talk to the say GPT API and other APIs, you're going to have to make sure that others that are using it can access your data if they want to intermix the information from GPT API, say, with your information. So some of the AI APIs become a lot smarter when they have context. And as a business, you want to make sure that your data is the context that people use. And the only way to really do that is to have your data exposed as APIs. But having it as an API is only the first step. So as you mentioned, API management. Well, there's a whole range of things that if you're just getting into APIs that you need to be aware of. I mean, nobody wants to be in the headlines because their API was hacked. So cybersecurity is super important. Security of your APIs is super important. But you have other things. You're going to have rate limiting. Take some of the Substack and some of the other Twitter, some of the API issues that have been going on with putting prices on some of the APIs and starting to monetize their APIs. A big reason for that was because AI had been getting all their information for basically free to kind of populate this model that then they can use. And I think a lot of these organizations suddenly, they don't want to be a free source of information. They want to make some money off this as well. Well, it's going to be important that you have, take a simple thing like rate limiting. If you're going to have a lot of other systems calling your APIs all of a sudden because of AI, well, you're going to need to make sure that you limit the calls to your APIs so that your system's not taken offline or your resources and your costs go through the roof because you didn't anticipate all this use of your API.
Yeah, no, that's that's an opportunity, but that's also really scary to think that now an AI can consume your data or at large scale because of people requests or because of a trend or because of people asking all the same thing at the same time or whatever. But there is also a question about like how, if you mix your internal data, if you give internal data as a context, do you consider today that the real safety, security, confidentiality, it's guaranteed or secured enough to do it, or do large LLM API providers need still to give some proof that they really are able to keep the context locally?
Well, in general, my suggestion, having investigated and worked in some of the cybersecurity for years, is don't trust anybody, and make sure that make sure your data is safe and secure. And that's why a lot of the organizations, and you take your governments, you take your big corporations, they're going to be working very hard to make sure that they can move some of the models on-prem and work where they can control the environment, the data, the model. And even if it costs them a lot more, they need that because they can't risk having their trade secrets and other things released. I mean, I know we've already had a few headlines in the news of companies of employees using, say, ChatGPT or other some of the AI interfaces and putting in some confidential information that somehow shows up after it was used to train some data. So I think, yes, you do have to be super worried about securing your data. And if you're using that information, you got to be careful what you give it. So maybe taking information and doing combining the context of it on your own on-prem, or I know some of the big providers, AWS and some of the others, are providing like private cloud models and some other things that I think we'll see how those work and how you're able to contain your data. But I'm always be very wary if what's the risk if your data is exposed, what's the liability and cost to your company, and can you handle that?
Yeah, that's a tough question, hard to answer. But our discussion reminds me about the data lake kind of discussion that's happened like in the last 10 years, with really someone who is in charge to make sure the data that comes into the data lake is sometimes anonymized or at least compliant, or that has the right refinement. To be sure that it complies with the ability to request it later, right?
Right.
So do you think we will have like AI trainers internally, like someone in charge of say, okay, this is what you can put in the local LLM, let's call it like that, the local instance, and I will be in charge of training it with the right data and being sure. So nobody will be allowed to train it on their own, but they will have this governance, this training governance, to be sure that, it's trained in a way that it respects security, confidentiality, and regulations.
Oh, I definitely think that, because look at over the years, I mean, that we've had databases, and all of a sudden, I mean, people realizing that your data, if you put data in your database and it was exposed at some point, it's like, oh, wow, maybe that was data we should have never put in the database, or we should have never been storing. Well, can you imagine now in another year or two, when it isn't databases that are being leaked online, it's models. And if someone gets access to a model that you trained internally, you got to make sure that, well, one, you put security around your model, but two, you got to make sure that the data that's going in there is really data that you want used. Because in the end, you don't really know. You may be training a model, but you don't know who the end consumer of that model is going to be. Even if it's an internal one, it might be a different department, a different a partner at some point. And if you put in things that you really didn't want exposed, maybe you start segmenting models, and there's going to be a whole career paths of people whose job is to probably make sure that data is proper to go into models. And yes, I agree. That's going to be a super important role as well.
Like being the best trainer, right? That will be,
Right.
So,
I know.
Yeah. But so what you say is that, imagine you're a large corporation, because it's so easy. I'm just talking recently. I was talking to large law firms who are asking me and everyone, like, does uploading a document to an LLM for analysis, a contract for analyzing the clause, is it breaking client attorney privilege? That's a question I think it's impossible to answer right now. But what you say is that it's large organization. The CEO may upload something, and if you don't contain the information, at some point the LLM can answer that from any employee questions. That's quite scary.
Yeah, it is. So I think that trainer role that you kind of described, you might want to trademark that, like some kind of AI trainer role, because I think that's going to be really important to sifting through the data to make sure that only the data you want and the sources of data that you want go in there. Because like outside of there, I mean, by country and region, you have different, I mean, you know, when Adobe's doing their model, they were very specific that we're not putting copyright data into our model, so that we can provide some kind of guarantee. If you're using this, you're not using copyright data. And then you have other ends of the spectrum that's like Japan, who recently had a ruling that it's okay. You can put wherever you want in a model. You can put copyright stuff. It doesn't matter. So you have two extremes that are going to be out there. And if you're using something as a base model and you want to make sure that it complies with whatever the policy is for your organization, as far as copyright, so that you're not, so it's not just what you put into the model, it's also what was in the model that you got from the start.
Yeah, so it's funny if Japan has this kind of law. I know some entrepreneurs who may wants to immigrate to Japan, right? So model immigration, you know, like yeah. But then if LLM are also a way to distribute your data, like you talked about rate limiting, you know, sometimes maybe security, sometimes there's maybe some personal information like PII, or you know, like what would you advise as a good API management practice to, for example, build a plugin, you know, to build a plugin for an LLM?
So if you're not already, if you don't have some kind of API management set up already, and you're all of a sudden creating an API to be able to use with artificial intelligence, some of the generative AI, it's very important that, I mean, you start focusing on your API management and say an API gateway, because setting up a policy to filter some of that data is going to be very important, especially now. So say before you had an API that leaked some information that maybe it wasn't critical, but it probably you were kind of giving out more information than you should have in your API. Well, that's one thing, but now all of a sudden, say you have a large corporation that's going to look at all your APIs and use all of your data to train its model. Well, now that's like a permanent record inside their model. So if you put too much information in there, that's a problem. So that's one of the benefits of API management, in addition to, say, rate limiting and some of the other cybersecurity things, is being able to self-filter like composite data, integrating with other APIs, but then only making sure that exactly the data that you want to go out is the data that's going out, in addition to who is it going to. So not just a general, hey, we have a password on our API, but role-based security for your API to make sure that someone who shouldn't have access to this API doesn't have access to it. I mean, you know, so many of the headlines that are about APIs being breached, a lot of times are because someone logged in with one username and password, but suddenly had access to data, a lot more data than they should have because of that.
But then there's the question about, like, if my customers wants to consume my services through an LLM, you know, like I cannot have just one key for the LLM, you know, like, so I need to be sure that the maybe the user will put the API key into the LLM, or you know, like that may cause some serious issue about, like, you know, key proliferation, or you know, because you cannot treat the full LLM as a one big user. Some of your own customer or own API consumer wants to use that interface versus your interface. So yeah, you will need to have this delegation that can be problematic. They will be kind of a back end of your there will be opportunities to actually build this new authorization layer.
Yeah, and we may have new definitions for what that looks like now. It may get a lot more complex than what it used to be with users and groups and roles and things like that. Maybe now there could be a more complex authorization and authentication systems in place now because of AI.
And also, you know, the temperature, you know, the fact that the LLM is able to generate more probabilistic stuff or not. So sometimes even go to hallucination when it's too much. But yeah, do you think we will also have this temperature rate limiting, like being sure at some point you say, okay, I accept my data to imagine you're a trusted source like government or whatever.
Okay.
But you say, okay, I don't want my data to go to an LLM or a request where temperature is more than 0.7 because it may fake stuff. I just want really low temperature, like low generation, because I want to be a real source. So yeah, API management will change at some point.
Yeah, and it may also change not only with the API management, but this may force a change eventually, or maybe it is already, of what it means to what is temperature and what is our allowable ranges for different things when we're generating information. But this is only going to get more and more prevalent in every business, because tools everywhere. I mean, even Microsoft Office and Google products are all integrating generative AI into their products. So whether or not you want to use AI, there's a high probability that you're going to be using AI, whether you want to or not, here coming very soon.
And maybe we can finish by something more AI in API management. For example, in API security, some AI threat modeling, to analyze the traffic and stuff. Did you see some interesting stuff, on API definition generation, or documentation generation or stuff like that? So did you see anything compelling yet, or some interesting initiatives?
So there's definitely API security tools that are using AI to kind of analyze traffic. Now, whether there's also a separate side of that too, that are using like LLMs to generate code so that it can understand how to process things, maybe dynamic policies, reacting to the information it's already getting. So you have different forms of AI kind of that I think are going to start working together a little bit more, along with the human side of things, which I always say AI is great right now, but it really still requires a subject matter expert if you're using something like generative AI. Doesn't matter if you're looking at code, video, images, whatever. You have to have someone that knows, is this right or wrong, before you place a high trust on it. So you're going to have people, experts, cybersecurity experts, be able to do much more, so they can 10x their work, if you will, because of the AI and starting to integrate some of that into the security products.
Yeah, no, that's what you say about the need of an expert. Like, I don't know if we have enough experts right now. So they can totally bargain their and negotiate well their revenues, because I don't think we have enough. But no, I totally agree with you. Knowing what we do in that space, having someone who really know what he does or what she does is extremely important, because it can be massive impact. It can have massive impact, and we don't know at the end what the machine the LLM as a machine, right? But is doing at the end, right? We
Right.
understand how it works a little bit, but sometimes we don't understand the hallucination or stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yep.
So yeah, there is great. If we wrap up, we say that LLM can be a huge opportunity, at least for augmenting the intelligence of your apps, because your consumers will want AI into their apps, or maybe because you want to appear in the LLM results, right? So that's
Right.
a huge opportunity, right? We say that organization needs to consume and need to learn how to integrate, as we say all the time. So they have this integration, these third-party policies, maybe a integration platform as a service for LLMs, but they need also to mix their current API management practice to LLM about rate limiting, or being sure when the data is shared is always shared in the right context, right?
Right. Yep. And to keep learning. I mean, don't put off looking at how AI is going to affect your APIs and your API management and everything else. And And closing out, just throw out there, I started a new YouTube series, Man versus Machine, which kind of is a focus on talking about AIs and APIs and kind of how those worlds are mixed. So it'd be interesting to see. It's an interesting subject that I think is going to go on for quite a while now.
Yeah, no, totally agree. We reached the time we had. Thank you very much, Brenton. Again, what's the name of your YouTube channel so we can
you can go to youtube.com/Brenton House.
Brenton House, like easy easy to remember.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Brenton, and see you at next API Days conference.
All right, thank you.
And so we are at the third segment of the day. We will go for a 25-minute break for coffee, for doing some exercise, or for reading emails and answering some emails. And we will be back in 25 minutes with the last segment of the day, and we will continue this the discussion on the topic of API management and LLM. Thank you, and see you in 25 minutes.